Hey y'all, thanks for popping by Stranger Stitches. I have a story for you today that I hope hasn't been told to death. This one kind of faded into the sidelines because these all events were happening at the same time Albert Fish was going on. So this one kind of got swept under the rug. But I found it, went down a rabbit hole, brought back some stuff for you to enjoy. I hope you find it entertaining. If you want to crochet along with me, I am using the super simple circle, and you can find the tutorial on my crochet playlist. On with the show. I'll see you at the end. August 13th, 1903, in Dixon City, Pennsylvania, Peter Kudzinowski was born, the youngest of 4 boys. So he was born under the sign of Leo, and rather than getting that warm, protective friendship that's the good qualities of the Leo, what we got from him was self-serving, egotism, possessiveness. Yeah, that's our boy. You know, Mama had her hands full. Friends and family said that child had always been just a little bit off, but about the time he was in 6th grade, he was diving headfirst into some shallow water and gave himself a skull fracture. And today we know what that can do. Whereas friends always said that he had been a bit off, there's something wrong with that little one. This skull fracture caused his cheese to slide completely off his cracker. After this injury, he decided that he was also not going to go to school anymore. So he didn't. Times being what they were, if you're not going to go to school, you're going to go to work. He found some employment with the Lackawanna Mining Company and later on the Lackawanna rail system. He knew those rails like the back of his hand, and it would serve him well later on. In 1924, he and his friend Harry Quinn hopped a rail car and took off to Springbrook Township. That was about 11 and a half miles away. They went under the guise of looking for work. Now, Harry might have been actually looking at a job, but I think that Peter was just along for the mischief. He had already started using aliases like Roy Lambert and Ray Rogers, and he introduced himself to Quinn's family and friends that way. He didn't even want the closest to know who he actually was. Later that evening, the two got in an argument over a bottle of whiskey. And that is when Harry Quinn met his untimely. Yeah, over a bottle of whiskey. He died from a crushing blow to the head with a rock. So, of course, Peter Kudzinowski is not going to own up to this. He's not going to turn himself in. So what he did, he hopped back on a freight train, headed back home. As soon as he got off the train, he threw some of his bloody clothing in the river and went back to his mom's house. I wonder what state of undress he was in going back to Mom's house. Yeah, it didn't say how many articles of clothing he threw in the river. And since my sense of humor is 12 years old, I got a giggle out of that. He gets home to Mom Veronica, and she lets him in. I mean, it's your family. They got to take you, right? But she locks him in a room for 3 days. I don't know what kind of room she locked him in that could hold a guy for 3 days, but I'm picturing it was probably something like the cellar. Now, the reason she kept him for 3 days was that she was waiting for her son Julian to get paid so they could give Peter his requested money and let him move along. The truth never really came out about what he did. I don't think Mom wanted to know. You mean you can't tell what you don't know, right? She don't want to turn in her own son, so just hang on. Julian will get you some money. Julian gets paid and gives his brother $529. That is $529.05 in today's money, so it was a meaningful amount. He buys himself a ticket to Buffalo, and this time he really does buy a ticket because you don't want to get busted on something while you're trying to run away. He goes to Buffalo, and from Buffalo he buys a bus ticket and gets himself to Detroit, Michigan. It seems like that Detroit was the place that Peter always went to try to disappear. That boy ain't got the sense God gave a goose. If you're trying to disappear, why do you always go to the same place? It don't make any sense. But then very little about his story does. So he stays gone for a little while, waits till things sort of cool off. I don't know if he had any contact with his family in that time, but I'm supposing not. And eventually he does go back to his old hometown. And I'm just going to mention that in 1927, 4-year-old Billy Gaffney went missing, as did Irving Pickleney. Also in that time, later on, we have a couple that he confessed to. But the previous two that I mentioned, well, I just don't know. We'll get to some other confessions next chapter. So for whatever reason, maybe all these missing kids, but who knows, you know what he does. He goes back to Detroit. Because that boy don't even know how many O's in stupid. But okay, he is hanging out at the dive bars again, and he is drunk. Drunk. He starts confessing to the bar patrons about the last life he took of a 7-year-old boy. And they're not believing him because he is known to be a mean drunk. He's a liar, he runs scams, and they just kind of blow him off. And nothing else happens with it. But later that night, he is arrested for public intoxication, and they run him into the drunk tank. He's not through confessing yet. He starts talking to the jailer and telling him the same story. I did it, 7-year-old boy. The jailer, sick as he thinks all this is, the guy's drunk. Pete is drunk and not to be believed. So they let him sober up and send him on his way. Yeah, a confessed killer got sent home because he was drunk. Okay, well, you do what you can. A couple days later, our boy Pete is knee-walking drunk again, and he goes up to a traffic booth where a cop is working, and he starts telling him, confessing again. He keeps trying to get somebody to believe him. Well, the cop asks, okay, whoa, pump the brakes. You're talking about murder? And Pete replies, well, you're just going to have to find out. So, the initial charge is he is arrested for PI again. That's twice in a time. They keep him. They let him sober up, and a detective, I think a couple of detectives, wanted to talk to him. Pete starts telling what he knows about the last life he took. He is questioned all that day up until around 4 in the morning. So even the police back then knew how to break somebody down. Sleep deprivation. They used that, and by about 7 a.m., he had signed a confession. But what I'm going to tell y'all next, I'm going to go through the confession the way he gave it, because this gets brutal. So the police had a plan in mind. They said, let's take you to the place that this happened. So what he did was confessed to one more. Yeah, a 5-year-old girl, Julia Kudzinowski. She was at the Delaware Water Gap Park on a church picnic. And she was out there walking around with some friends, her sister Stella, who was 17 years old, and a friend named Blanche. But they got an offer to go rowing out on the water, and the two older girls said no thank you, and somehow they got separated from Julia. Can you think of anything more innocent than a 5-year-old girl on a church picnic? Maybe that's why he did it, so he could destroy something that perfect. Police from both states were represented in this outing that they had. They were from Pennsylvania and from New Jersey because it was right there on the state line and they didn't know whose jurisdiction it was. They wanted to be sure that they got everything covered under right jurisdiction so there was no conflict once they went to court, that everything had been done, on a form and in a manner so it would all stand up. Peter Kudzinowski takes them out in the woods, tramps through the brush along the river, and there's an apple tree. And he shows them the place where he had taken that young girl, bashed her head in with the rock, dismembered her body with an axe, and then he had taken her body to an empty boxcar that was nearby getting refilled with water. He had ripped paper off the inside wall of this boxcar, wrapped Julia's body in it, wrapped that with some copper wire, and weighed her down with brake shoes that he had stolen. As the train started to cross the bridge, his words were, "I pitched the parcel over." Oh, so the state line runs right through the middle of the river, and there's a marker on the bridge. They had to have him show where exactly he pitched the parcel. And he did. He showed them exactly where everything went down, and it was on the New Jersey side. So the Pennsylvania police were dismissed to go back and solve their own cases. I think the benefit was that communication between police departments at the time was probably very difficult. At least the Pennsylvania police were aware and could compare any cases that they found that were similar to this one. So the police go on a hunt for the body. They have some rakes and some basic tools, but they couldn't get too far into the water because of the current. And they had to have more police come back with boats and grappling hooks and that sort of stuff. Well, they searched, and what they found was some copper-plated wire with some brake shoes. And Pete just shook his head. He said, no, that's not what I used on Julia. Wow. I'm just wondering if maybe that's what he used on Quinn, on Harry Quinn, to dispose of his body there, because that's almost a signature, isn't it? Yeah. But Quinn's body was never found, and so far as I know, neither was Julia. He goes on to tell them about Joseph Storelli. This seems to be the one that he was most fond of, and he gave the most detail about this one. Pete goes over to the East Village, and he knows what he's going after. He confesses to going on a hunt to find another child. Oh, sick bucks. I can't say that enough. Him and Albert Fish, I tell you what, there's a hot spot in hell for them. The first kid he comes across kind of playing by himself, bouncing a ball off the wall, approaches him and says, "Hey, would you like some candy and go see a movie?" And the kid, very intrigued by this proposition, says, "Sure, I'd like that." And Pete takes him by the wrist. And the kid gets real squeaked out about that. And he pulls away and he's like, "No thanks." And he runs on home. The next kid he comes across, a little girl. And he proposes the same thing. "How about some candy and a movie?" She thinks about it. And she does walk a little ways with him. She walks about half a block with him. And either something he says or does trips her trigger. And the newspaper said she ran off in a billow of ribbons and petticoats. I thought that was kind of a cute way to describe it. Thank goodness she got away. The next child he comes across, he's pissed off by now. He's got 2 strikes, and he is not leaving empty-handed. He comes across Joseph Storelli. This little boy is looking in the window at the fish shop. Apparently, he has found something fascinating in there. He is a 7-year-old boy, and who knows what catches their attention. He calls the boy over and says, you know what he says, "How about some candy and a movie?" Joseph thinks that's a grand idea, and they skip along to the candy stall. I think it was, the way they described it was like a street vendor for all kinds of sweets. They get him some cherry drops, which also sound delightful. And they go on to the movie. And it was about a 45-minute show, a little comedy. And during the confession, Peter Kudzinowski is very frustrated with himself that he cannot remember the name of the movie. Now, isn't that a petty thing to be thinking about? Yeah, he's all frustrated because he can't remember the name of the movie, but it seems that what followed seemed to be okay. Peter got Joseph on a train, the Port Authority Trans-Hudson train, to Journal Square in Jersey City. And once they got there, they took a walk over to the New Jersey Meadowlands near Secaucus. And he took him out on the marsh and started abusing him. Pete was afraid that somebody would hear the boy screaming and crying. This boy fought for his life. He put up a fight as best he could. Pete cut his throat to keep him quiet and covered his body with the boy's own overcoat and a pile of leaves. His body wasn't found until December 6th. In the meantime, his mother was beside herself. She was out on the streets hollering and crying for someone to please send her boy home. She spoke in both English and Italian. And when she found out that he had passed, the family just couldn't take it anymore. They packed up and went back to Italy. Now I'm going to mention a couple of kids that we briefly talked about before. In 1923, this was before the death of Harry Quinn, Irving Pickleney disappears from Brooklyn. Pete was considered a suspect in this case. Irving's body was found in a cellar on Suffolk Street. That was just 2 blocks from where he lived. Investigators arrested Nathan Shatsky for this one. But check this out. Some witnesses say that there was a man walking the streets trying to offer kids, you know what he was offering: candy and a movie. There was no less than 3 witnesses that say everybody declined. He even approached one kid that was with their mother, saying, "Can I take your kid to a movie? Got a free ticket, might as well enjoy it." Making up all kinds of stories. But Nathan Shatsky was the neighborhood crazy. He was just weird. Just every neighborhood's got one of those people. I'm probably the weirdo in mine, but I don't disparage nobody that. And since the MO is so close, I don't know where I am on Nathan Shatsky, but I believe Peter could have been a good suspect for this one. The other kid that went missing about this time is Billy Gaffney, and he was only 4 years old. Ugh. But here's what happened. Billy Gaffney and his friend, also named Billy, were playing out in the hallway outside of their apartment, and their brother was listening for them. Bubba knows, because when it got quiet out in the hallway, he knows what toddlers don't. Let a toddler get too quiet, right? He goes out there to check on them. Both boys are gone. Little Billy, the friend, is found in a hallway, cuddled up in an archway, in a doorway, and he is scared to death. He was questioned, and they asked him, "Who took your friend?" And he said, "The gray man." Long droopy mustache, dressed in gray clothes, kind of looking sort of dusty. This is Albert Fish to me. I wouldn't have put this one on Pete Kudzinowski. Albert Fish did this one, but Pete was a suspect for a minute. On December 10th, Pete is arraigned in criminal court, and they said that he was showing no emotion. And the newspaper wrote it up as he was humming and whistling, picking his nails, doodling on paper. He could have cared less about, he couldn't have cared less. Okay. He couldn't have cared less about what was going on around him. Wasn't fazed in the slightest. The only thing he said was, "Make it quick." On December 15th, the police department gets a letter, and it's kind of written out in broken English, but it does give the suggestion that if Pete is released, he won't be alive long. And it's signed Friends of Joey from the East Side. Either way, he's got a death sentence. January 9th, the trial begins. Some of the witnesses for the defense say that he has a diseased mind. They even showed some x-rays of where the skull fracture had healed. It was brought up that he probably couldn't differentiate right from wrong, but the jury was not buying this. They were looking at him, and he was not a convincing person at all as far as the insanity goes. On January 11th, they only deliberated for just a few minutes, and they came back with guilty of first-degree murder for Joseph. I don't know how the justice system worked at the time, but he's already got one death sentence. I don't think that they were going to, what they say, waste the court's time and resources trying him for Julia and Harry Quinn. He's already got a death sentence, but it would have been a little justice for the family to at least have had that mentioned, right? So he's placed on death row. His defense attorneys exhaust their appeals, and he doesn't care. He is still saying the same thing. Just make it quick. Well, a few months into his sentence, his father collapses and dies. Family says that it was a heart attack due to the stress of having his son in jail. Well, I can't imagine that all those years in a coal mine did him much good either. On December 21st, just hours before his execution, Peter Kudzinowski orders ice cream as his last meal and declines to make any final statements. Kudzinowski states he is up against it and he is ready to go. And he would more than likely commit the same acts if he were released. So, yeah, it's best this way. At 8:07 p.m., Robert Elliott, who is the executioner, sends 2,000 volts through Peter Kudzinowski's body in the electric chair they called Old Sparky over at Trenton State Prison. By 8:14 p.m., Peter Kudzinowski is officially pronounced dead. He was 26 years and 4 months old. So that's the story I found for y'all this week. It was one that got buried under something else that got a little more press. Oh, and if you like stories like that, my Tim's Torso Mysteries, also on this playlist, got buried under Jack the Ripper. So yeah, it's another interesting one to take a look at if y'all have time. But that's me for this week. Let me know if you want more stories like this. In the meantime, don't take candy from strangers. I'll see y'all next week.